Hello, my name is Tara Ronsleben. I am a graduate student certified in human sexuality, working on a master's in the field, and I think we should talk about arousal. The universe really didn't want me to make this video, guys. I've been trying for 3 days. I've had a lot of technical difficulties. I'm having to change some things on a tech side, which I'm not very good at, so apologies if this video looks or sounds weird, but we make our own fates around here, and this video is gonna get made. It's gonna get done, but it might be a little chaotic, seeing as I don't have a ton of time or light anymore because it is now November in Texas, which means the sun comes and goes as it pleases, and I just have the one ring light, which helps, but I'm mostly relying on my big old windows for lighting. Also, I will go through various costume changes, seeing as I don't wear the same thing every day. Close, very similar things every day, not the same thing. Is that all the disclaimers? Should I address the elephant in the room? I've been gone for a minute. I have been away as I was incredibly busy and then incredibly burnt out. And apparently refusing to acknowledge you're burnt out doesn't actually make you not burnt out. So I took some time off of work, off of screens as much as I could, off of most things, and made myself rest a little bit, which is difficult for me, but I highly recommend if you are starting to feel burnt out, if you're starting to feel really stressed, if things you generally enjoy are feeling like work or chores, or if you're not there yet, even better, please take care of yourself so you don't get there. Make sure you are taking any medication you're supposed to. Make sure you are drinking water and exercising and going to therapy and making your doctor's appointments and all the like cliche annoying things that people tell you all the time, but it's because they're true and they do help. Take care of yourselves. It's important. Only got one you. Now, this is also going to be a very long video. I'll warn you up top. If you didn't already check how long it is before clicking on this. I will also be doing a, TLDR or TLDW in this case, too long didn't watch recap video, as short as I can to kind of hit the main points of interest in this video. But arousal's kind of a massive topic. It's a great topic. It was a topic that was brought up in a YouTube comment, so shout out Pierre for that. They actually recommended a very concise and focused topic, but me being me went, no, I'm gonna tackle the whole shebang. We're gonna talk about all of arousal. Well, not all of it, but as much as my brain can handle. So this'll be a doozy, but let's get into it. There's a lot to discuss. Sexual response models are the social science perspective on arousal. They explain how arousal starts and how it ends. And that will make more sense once I get into explaining the actual models. We'll start with the Masters and Johnson sexual response cycle model, as that is the one that is still most commonly taught today, despite it being from 1966 and fairly linear. The Masters and Johnson sexual response cycle goes excitement, plateau, orgasm, resolution. Or excitement, plateau, orgasm, resolution. I don't know which direction I need to be pointing for this to make sense on video. Anyway, the excitement phase is early arousal. Then we have the plateau, that is peak arousal, but not quite orgasm yet. Orgasm is orgasm, obviously. And then the resolution phase is the refractory period post-orgasm. Now, the refractory period is generally only applied to men, those who are assigned male at birth. This study was done in 1966, so it was obviously only done on cisgendered, straight, white, married couples, so obviously not the most diverse group of research participants. For women that are multi-orgasmic, let's just say people who are multi-orgasmic, you basically go excitement to plateau to orgasm to orgasm to orgasm to however many you have to then resolution. The resolution stage comes after the final orgasm ends. Now, this theory is fine. It's cool. It's great. It's a little, not the best, right? But it's a start. I've got a couple of issues with it, personally. I'm not the only one. There's research on this. So the Masters and Johnson sexual response cycle is linear and has 4 phases. According to this model, if you aren't hitting those 4 phases in that order, you are experiencing some degree of sexual dysfunction. Now, orgasm is one of those phases. For a lot of people, orgasm is incredibly difficult to reach, and that doesn't make them sexually dysfunctional. Orgasm is a cherry on top of a healthy sexual dynamic, but isn't necessary to complete sex. A lot of people view sex as this sort of race to the finish, but orgasm isn't necessary for sex to be sex, or for a healthy, happy, satisfactory sexual experience to have occurred. The Masters and Johnson model also, because it is a linear model, assumes that excitement or arousal, desire, happens first before there is any sort of sexual touch enacted. Now, this is true for some people, but it doesn't take into account the differences between spontaneous versus reactive desire. Now, we'll go into explaining the differences between those a little bit more later, but a lot of people experience a reactive type of desire where it is that initiation of sexual interaction, whether that be kissing, talking, touching, whatever, that jumpstarts that desire. Some people will randomly get horny, sure. Some people need to be put in the mood. And that's also incredibly normal. And this model does not account for that. The biggest problem with the Masters and Johnson sexual response cycle is that it's purely describing a pattern of physiological responses as opposed to accounting for the complexity of arousal, which includes relationship dynamics, it includes cultural factors, it includes mental health states, moods, it includes political issues, it includes external factors, and none of that is factored into this model. In 1979, we see the Kaplan Triphasic concept pop up. Now, this takes the Masters and Johnson's sexual response cycle model and condenses it into 3 stages instead of 4. We have excitement, then desire, then orgasm. Now, was this an improvement at the time on the Masters and Johnson's model? I don't know. I wasn't there. But it still has the same major 3 flaws of the Masters and Johnson model in that it is still linear, it still relies on spontaneous arousal, and it still requires orgasm. In 1997, the ladies got their shot and created a circular model as opposed to the linear models of the past, specifically the Whipple and Brash McGreer circular model. That's been very difficult for me to say, which was created specifically to model female desire. Now, the idea of this circular system, the key point of it was that previous sexual encounters are going to inform your desire levels for your next one. I.e., if you had an unsatisfying sexual relationship, you are going to feel less desire to engage in sex again, and vice versa. If you had a great time, you're going to be more willing to have more sex. Now, this is interesting, yeah, and true to an extent, but a little surface level. Then comes Y2K, the year 2000, and we get the Basson nonlinear model of sexual response. This was created both for men and women and incorporates things like a need for intimacy, acknowledges spontaneous versus reactive desire, recognizes that orgasms add to satisfaction but aren't necessary to complete the cycle, and also includes a cost and rewards system for factoring in relationship dynamics. It is definitely a lot more inclusive, but a little hard to follow on a chart. Like, I want to trace it like a flow chart and then immediately get lost. Enter Emily Nagoski, major player in the sexology, sexual education, sex world. We all bow down to Emily Nagoski. Emily Nagoski posited what she called the dual control model, and we are big fans. And by we, I mean me, I am. Lots of other people, and probably you when I'm done explaining it. Nagoski explains that arousal works a little bit like the gas pedals and brake pedals on your car. What hits the gas, the accelerators, is going to be anything that gets us all excited, that propels us forward on that arousal track. That can be things like, sexy images, alcohol, being really connected to someone, hormonal changes, anything like that. What hits our brakes are the inhibitors, anything that sort of pulls us back or stops us from wanting to have sex. Now, sometimes these are very valid things, like you're in your workplace. Obviously, you can't have sex there. That inhibitor is going to need to outweigh, that brake is going to need to outweigh that gas pedal. But sometimes, even when you're in a situation where you want to have sex, those inhibitors can overwhelm that gas pedal. Those inhibitors can be things like stress or fatigue or anxiety or physiological factors like pain or mental health issues, low self-esteem, body image issues, time constraints, just weird environments, anything like that, anything that makes you not want to have sex, anything hitting your brakes. Now, that brakes and gas is going to be very different per person. Some people have very sensitive gas pedals and some people have very sensitive brake pedals. And what is on my gas pedal might hit someone else's brakes. It's all person dependent. What's great about this model is that we tend to think that if we are in a sexual situation and we aren't flooring that gas pedal, that there must be something wrong with us, that our sex drive is broken in some way. But it may just be that there's a brick on your brake pedal that is holding you back from going as fast as you'd like to when it comes to arousal. I went really far into a car metaphor, and I don't know anything about cars. Like, you know how people have face blindness? I think I fully have car blindness. I only find my car in a parking spot purely based on knowing my own license plate number. Like, don't tell me, oh, like when you get an Uber and they're like, oh, look out for the Camry G75, and I'm like, okay, what color is it? Like, I don't know what a car is. I wouldn't even have a car if I didn't have to, but Texas has incredibly car-focused infrastructure. None of this matters. None of this has anything to do with arousal. Unless we're discussing that cars on my brakes list. Not interested. Physiological arousal is how we're going to refer to the way our body responds to feeling turned on. As mentioned before, and probably mentioned again after this section, sexual arousal can be spontaneous, coming out of nowhere, or reactive, meaning the desire comes in response to a sexual scenario. Now, what's interesting about our body's arousal response is that the actual physiological processes are pretty similar across all sorts of types of arousal. Sexual arousal, but also anger, fear, excitement, anxiety. That's why sometimes the body struggles to understand if you're feeling anxious about something or excited about something. and why some people find horror movies really sexy. It's causing the same sort of physiological responses in your body. And those physiological responses are all about blood flow. In sexual arousal, it means that your heart rate increases, your pupils dilate, you might start to flush or get a little sweaty, your nipples will become hard and erect and change in color and maybe size as the blood flow rushes to them. That blood flow will also start rushing south, and the results are pretty similar across all types of genitalia. If you've seen my anatomy video, you might remember me saying that we have analogous parts, analogous genitalia. That means that we all have the same parts, just rearranged, and those parts are going to respond in very similar ways to increased blood flow. In those with penises, that means that that blood flow is going to fill the shaft of the penis and cause it to engorge and lift, an erection. The head of the penis will swell, which causes the skin of the foreskin, for those who have it, to tighten and start to retract. Now, it might retract all the way, it might need a little help, that depends on your body. The testicles will also begin to swell and ascend closer to the body as they begin amping up for semen production. In some people, this may be when you start to notice pre-ejaculatory fluid coming from the head of the penis. Not everyone produces pre-ejaculate or pre-cum, as some people call it, while some can produce up to 5 milliliters of it. This fluid is a result of the Cowper's gland and serves as a lubricant, but also as an acid neutralizer. Remember that in those with penises, the urinary tract is not urine specific in the same way it is for AFAB people. So the main purpose of pre-ejaculate is to neutralize the urethral tract in order to make way for ejaculate, semen, because sperm is notoriously not a fan of acidic environments. Pre-ejaculate itself contains little to no sperm. However, it's important to note that pre-ejaculate can spread viral diseases like HIV, so it's important to get a condom involved early on in order to protect yourself from STIs and STDs. In those with vaginas, the process is very similar. The labia and clitoris will engorge with blood and begin to swell. The clitoris will harden and become erect, like the glands of the penis, and the labia may begin to shift in color, becoming darker with the increased blood flow. Vaginal lubrication becomes a bit more of a process as we're creating lubricant both for the inside and the outside. Interior vaginal lubrication comes from the plasma of the walls of the vaginal canal, whereas the external lubrication is the result of the Bartholin's glands, which are 2 little glands on either side of the opening of the vaginal canal. Just before and during ovulation, cervical mucus also adds to the level of lubrication there. Speaking of the cervix, when aroused, the cervix and uterus will actually lift higher up into the body in order to make room for the tenting of the vagina. When the vagina tents, it is actually expanding in both width and length and can even double in size. Wild, right? But sometimes that body response doesn't quite line up with what's going on in our most important sex organ, the mind. This is what we call arousal non-concordance. Arousal non-concordance is when what's happening in our mind and what's happening in our body aren't quite in agreement about whether we are turned on or not. Take, for instance, you may be really into the idea of the sex you're about to have, but then there's not really anything going on down south. In cases like that, it is important to take a step back and make sure you know what you want, but if the answer to that is sex, then what your body is doing is not a reflection of how you feel about the moment or the person or yourself. It may just mean that you need to spend a little more time together before you get to any sort of penetration, or you may need to add some store-bought lubricant if your body doesn't feel like producing its own. Arousal non-concordance can also go the other way. I mean, we've heard plenty of stories of surprise boners and weird wet dreams, or maybe you're watching the Nature Channel and you're watching bonobos do what bonobos do, and you start to feel a little wet and you go, oh God, am I into monkeys? No, not necessarily. I don't know you, but this is a real study, by the way. I'm not just bringing up bonobos for no reason. Any input that we interpret as sexual, as in having anything to do with sex, our bodies can and often will respond to. This is also often a major source of shame for survivors of sexual assault, as they may feel that their assault wasn't real or that it was in some way their fault if their body responded to it in a way that your body might respond to a positive sexual interaction. Do you remember me saying earlier how the physiological responses in our bodies are very similar to the same sort of blood rushing sensations that happen when we are angry or frightened? And while sexual assault is often much more about power than it is about sex, it still includes sexual input. And sometimes those wires can get crossed and our body will respond. But that doesn't mean anything about how we felt about that situation and whether it was consensual or not. You should never feel shame about anything that anyone has done to you. And it's important to remember that consent is the baseline for sex. Clear, full, non-coerced, communicated consent. There are a ton of hormones involved in arousal and sex, especially for those who menstruate and therefore ovulate. Anyone who ovulates can tell you that there are certain times of the month that are particularly arousing, and that has to do with the surging hormone levels on particular days of the menstrual and ovulation cycle. While some people do experience increased desire during menstruation, and that can be a PMS symptom, for most it is the days leading up to and the day of ovulation that are the horniest, to put it bluntly. This is due to hormone levels. The fertile window lasts for about 7 days each month. Now, this is based on a 28-day cycle, which a lot of people don't have, but it's a good, easy number, so go with me with that. Pre-ovulation, luteinizing hormone, or LH, and estrogen begin to surge, and progesterone begins to tank. The combination of the surges and drops in hormone levels lead to an increase in sexual desire. Sexual desire has been shown to spike 3 days before peak LH levels, or 24 to 36 hours pre-ovulation. This is the body's way of saying, hey, we can get pregnant soon, so get to it. Now, obviously not everyone is trying to make a baby once a month, but these increased levels of estrogen and luteinizing hormone also increase your mood, your energy. They boost health and creativity and confidence and attractiveness. Fun fact, estrogen increases also cause a slightly higher pitched voice during fertile periods. Cervical mucus also increases pre-ovulation, which can lead to a feeling of wetness, which can cause a reactive mental arousal to this perceived physical arousal. According to some studies, these hormone levels aren't just noticeable to the people experiencing them, though. Just FYI, this study I'm about to reference used only cisgender research participants, so I'm going to be using the language they used in the study, but note that I am referring to binary sex and not gender identity. So according to this research, testosterone levels in men were sinking to the ovulation cycles of the women around them. Now, these men obviously weren't conscious of this, but the study showed that men who were around ovulating women had higher levels of testosterone in their system than men who were exposed to non-ovulating women. Now, this was a fairly small study, and that doesn't make it conclusive in any way, but interesting, n'est-ce pas? There are also a ton of hormones released during sex that I'd like to discuss. We'll start with the holy trinity of feel-good hormones. That's oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine. Now, oxytocin is often what we refer to as the love hormone, as it is really critical in helping us form emotional bonds. Oxytocin release is triggered by physical touch, whether that be hugging, kissing, stroking skin, and having sex. The emotional bonds formed with the help of oxytocin are not purely romantic or emotional bonds, though. Platonic and familial bonds are also impacted by oxytocin. Oxytocin is also a really important chemical in creating the parent and child bond, which is why you'll often hear about skin-to-skin time being really important with newborn babies. Oxytocin is also a natural pain reliever in the sense that it actually increases our threshold for pain. This is why some people enjoy pain in a sexual context, but not necessarily outside of it. Our threshold for pain is higher when we're receiving lots of physical touch and producing lots of oxytocin. Oxytocin also brings with it some buddies in the form of endorphin. Endorphins release stress and improve your immune system, which means that having regular sex can actually help you with stress management and is shown to increase levels of immunoglobulin A, which is an antibody that helps to fight off viral illnesses, like the one I seem to have, if you can hear from my voice. So while oxytocin makes us feel connected, serotonin makes us feel calm. Serotonin is released post-orgasm and enhances your mood and leads to feelings of peace and satisfaction. Serotonin also makes you sleepy and can lead to deeper and more restful sleep, which is why some people tend to conk out immediately after sex. Our third feel-good chemical is the ultimate feel-good, dopamine, the pleasure chemical. If you watch my video on Sex Playlist, you might remember me discussing the role of dopamine in the reward center of our brain. It's chemical compensation for doing things that ensure our species' survival. And reproduction is pretty key for species survival, so we get a big hit of dopamine when we have sex, regardless of whether it ends up in more little humans or not. Dopamine is also really important for focus and attention span, and having regular sex can increase concentration and task completion abilities. Sounds like I need to be getting laid more often. Dopamine is also a little bit addictive, so it can also sort of help in that bonding experience, although it will often lead to more codependence rather than interdependence, but that's what therapy is for. Now let's discuss testosterone. Testosterone is often considered the male hormone, as in women have estrogen, men have testosterone, but everyone has both in their system, just in different levels, different amounts. Testosterone is incredibly important for every body, as it is crucial in the development of bone and muscle mass, and also in brain development in areas like cognition and empathy and spatial reasoning. And while people who are assigned female at birth often do have lower baseline levels than those who are assigned male at birth, conditions like PCOS actually increase testosterone levels in AFAB people to higher than AMAB people typically have. Testosterone is also very important in sexual arousal. Studies in non-human primates showed that the spikes in testosterone that occurred at puberty were what jump-started sexual motivation and prompted primates to seek out other primates for sexual experiences. Now, that sounds a lot like human puberty to me. And kissing, another key element of human puberty, isn't just for fun, although it is definitely fun. Testosterone is present in saliva and can be transmitted through the mucous membranes of the inside of the mouth, which means that kissing and swapping saliva actually increases testosterone levels for everyone and can stimulate sexual arousal. Did I just succeed in making kissing sound incredibly unsexy? Sorry about that. You may have noticed that my hair looks like I picked up a pair of scissors on a whim 5 minutes before I sat down to record this. That is because that is what happened. You may have also noticed that I try to avoid using any particularly gendered language in my videos, and you may have noticed that I'm not always great at that. We live in an incredibly gendered culture, and our understandings of gender are very binary. But as I've mentioned before, there are a lot of similarities in these supposedly opposite sides of a binary, in our anatomy, our hormones, our desires, and a whole spectrum in and around them when it comes to identity and sex and gender. But I've often been told that there is a fundamental difference in the way men versus women experience arousal. Men are visual, women are emotional. Men are built for one-night stands and having multiple partners, while women are made to be in monogamous long-term relationships. I'm sure you've heard similar things, and I'm sure, like me, you've seen anecdotal evidence that both backs up those ideas and completely refutes them. So I thought I'd ask science, and science didn't know. In fact, the one thing science seems to be consistently able to tell us, which is, the beauty of science, is that we don't know much. Because arousal involves quantifiable, measurable, physiological response, as well as more abstract conceptual things like feelings and desires and fantasies, it's been difficult for science to get a grasp on the entirety of the subject. We can measure our genital responses in a laboratory setting, but as we just discussed, your genital response doesn't always align with the way you're thinking or feeling. And most of our research in the past has fallen prey to that binary nature of our culture and excluded variations in race, sex, orientation, and gender identity in order to make that quantifiable data much easier to calculate. But humans aren't easy. In searching for the difference between female and male desire, much of the research that was coming up was done in the heyday of sexual research, which was the 60s and 70s. Our understanding of sex and sexuality and desire have evolved a lot since then, as well as our technology. While before we could only measure external responses, new technology using brain MRIs is actually unraveling some of the ideas we have about that firm division between man and woman. A team from the Max Planck Institute for Biological Cybernetics, which is such like a cool sci-fi name, it doesn't sound like a real thing that exists now, but anyway, they completed a meta-analysis of 61 different brain imaging studies comparing data that spanned across thousands of people of various sexes, gender orientations, and sexual orientations, and found no evidence that differences in brain activation had anything to do with biological sex. Not that they didn't find any differences in brain activation across these scans, it's just that they had to do with things like videos versus photos, or things that people found personally sexually appealing versus things that they weren't into. Here's some science-y quotes from the actual published study. Systemic review of sex differences in gray matter volume of brain regions associated with sexual arousal, 3,723 adults, did not show any causal relationship between structural features and functional response to visual sexual stimuli. The neural basis of sexual arousal in humans is associated with sexual orientation, yet, contrary to the widely accepted view, is not different between women and men. The study also said that it offered strong quantitative evidence that the neural response to visual sexual stimuli, contrary to the widely accepted view, is independent of biological sex. I will be posting that full study below for anyone who wants to dig more into that. So does this study undo all of the years of anecdotal evidence that you may have experienced yourself or seen around you? No, it's one study, and while it's one study studying lots of other studies, it's still only looking at one aspect of the arousal process, our gray matter activation. And maybe it's because I have the mind of someone with a literature degree and no science background beyond personal curiosity, but while I know that the brain is responsible for all the signals sent and received in our bodies and that in many ways we are our brains, there's a lot more to people than being a culmination of body parts, of bits of meat thrown together. I love to do a gross metaphor, don't I? But we are more than our parts, and there are factors beyond electrical impulses that make us who we are and who we love and who we want to fuck. I thought that standing up would be interesting for an outro, since I had outfit changes in all of the other sections of this because they were filmed on different days. But I didn't think about the fact that this is not a microphone that's meant to be stood and held, and I don't like standing up also. I'm very bad at standing still. I tend to be either horizontal or moving at all times, so this was generally a bad idea beyond the fact that you can now see my cool star pants. So if you like my star pants, or this video, or me, like this video, do the little thumbs up thingy, subscribe, leave a comment, would love that. Let me know what else you'd like to hear about. This video covered some of the science of arousal, but I will be doing videos in the future on some of the more cultural aspects of it, sexual scripts, sexuality, that sort of thing. I also kind of was hoping that standing up would make me better at doing outros. I don't know, like a new perspective sort of thing. Like when people stand on their heads to get ideas. Didn't help. Still have no idea what I'm supposed to say here. Didn't practice, didn't write anything down. Anyway, thanks for watching.